Thank you all so much for coming to this session on making PostgreSQL hacking more inclusive. I am really pleased to be here with my co-presenters Amit Langote, Masahiko Sawada, and Melanie Plageman. And I am Robert Haas. The way we're going to do this session mechanically is that I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then we will each take a turn sharing a few thoughts from our own experience, and then hopefully, time permitting, there will be a bit of time for questions and comments at the end from all of you. What I would like to start my introduction by saying is that I have been working in the PostgreSQL community since 2008, and I think it's awesome. This is the coolest thing that I've ever done professionally speaking. I am married and I have 2 children, so it is definitely not the coolest thing that I've ever done in general, but it is the coolest thing that I have done professionally speaking. I am very grateful for all of the opportunities that this community has given me to be involved. There are so many smart people in this community, nice people, hardworking people. I think we have great technical discussions, and I think that there are lots and lots of interesting problems to solve, and which I enjoy trying to solve, sometimes with more success than others. But I don't think that we're a perfect community, and I think that one of the ways that we are not a perfect community is that sometimes we are not fair. Sometimes we judge people on things other than the quality of their work, like some personal characteristic that they may have. And slightly more subtly, sometimes we extend opportunities to people who are more like us. So if we are organizing a conference or choosing a new committer or a new core team member or a new sysadmin, or any other thing that we might need to find someone else to help do, we might choose someone that we have a lot in common with instead of someone that we have less in common with. And that can be another way that we are unfair. And I think even a little more subtly than that, sometimes we behave in ways that seem fine to us and maybe to people in our group, but are maybe more of a problem for people in some other group. And I will not belabor that point because you're about to see lots and lots of examples of that in the rest of the talk. And I think that unfairness is a problem. I mean, it can look bad for the project, obviously, but it can also drive away potential new contributors. And we really, really need more people to contribute to PostgreSQL if we want it to continue being awesome. And I think an even subtler thing that we might not think about, but which I believe is really, really true, is that unfairness can drive away or demoralize existing contributors. We often speak of it as if once you're a PostgreSQL contributor, you're going to continue doing this at full steam for the rest of your life. But in fact, many of us get quite burnt out, and we get tired of some of this stuff, and we don't enjoy dealing with it. And hacking on PostgreSQL just becomes less enjoyable because we see these unfairnesses happen, which I think is the best reason to fix this, because that's not about making it bad for someone else. That's about making it bad for us. There are a lot of ways, a lot of characteristics someone might have that could result in this inequality of opportunity. And all of you will be pleased to know that I am not going to read this entire slide. Nor do I think that every time you send an email or talk to someone or do anything, you can necessarily think individually about every single one of these things. But nor do I think that we can solve all of the problems and ever get to being a perfect community where everything is 100% fair all the time. For example, we probably need to pick one language to have discussions on the mailing list is, and whatever language we pick, and even if we switch languages at some point, that language is going to be easier for some people than it is for others, and that's not going to be fair. But we can be aware of that unfairness, and we can try to think about what we can do to minimize it and to give people the best opportunity to be able to participate in this hopefully great community, which I believe we are all wanting and intending to build. So that's it for my introduction, and now I'd like to turn it over to Amit.
Thanks, Robert. My name is Amit Langote. I am a Postgres major contributor and committer, and I would like to take this opportunity to share my experiences and thoughts that I hope would be helpful in context of this talk. All right. So a couple of like meta points. I mean, like as I write on the slide, I'm sharing this bits from like from my journey in the Postgres community and my experiences. So I want to share some of the experiences that had a lot of impact on me personally, like psychologically, and which made being part of this community for let's say 11 years at this point easier. And I hope that by sharing these experiences, people who have similar background as me or who have like similar personalities might find that relevant. And by sharing these experiences, like some of you who like may not have realized that like this is how I I work, or this is how I think. I hope that it might be helpful to know that. So yeah, even if like I'm not like talking for like everyone who's like me, I still hope that like just by being here and sharing my experience, like I can bring the some benefit to this discussion. Okay. So yeah, the first point that I want to have is still kind of a meta point, I would say. It's working on Postgres or doing any kind of work. You have to have like two personas. Like you have to be the person in your personal life, and then you have a persona for dealing with like work-related matters. And when working on Postgres, the thing that I have realized that in my personal life, I'm not like as direct or as assertive as people need to be successful, or to kind of bring their point across in many occasions. And it's like when I have to every day when I have to like start working, I have to kind of switch into being like a different person. And I'm sure it is true for like many of you. And it's because of where I live or where I am from. That kind of transition between these two personas can be draining at times, and I hope that it's okay that I'm sharing that here. So yeah, and one like general point I want to make from this is that like in my personal experience, because I'm like unable to kind of share my thoughts more directly, it's something that I'm just unable to do on many occasions, and people have let me know or mentioned to me that that is kind of limiting what I can be. Like I could be more successful if I made certain points in a more direct and more assertive manner. And I think that many of you, or like many of the people who are part of the community, may face this same kind of an issue where they have to like they have to be more direct, but they can't because of their personality or because of where they are. And so I think if we all kind of take this into account, we could like be more understanding and be aware that people are having this experience. And the next point is, yeah, like this, it's kind of related to the previous one. The main thing is that we have to talk on email. We don't always get to be meet in person all the time. So, and on email, you have to kind of talk or write in a tone that's almost always different from the way like we talk in person. For example, you must have met many of the senior hackers or other people that you know on the mailing list, but I think they sound very different when you talk to them directly than how they sound like when you're reading their emails. And that's a challenge, especially to like non-native English speakers. It's hard to kind of express our thoughts in email or even in person. That's true. Like it's hard to kind of say what we want to say because of this barrier. And just to sound coherent, like in emails, like people don't want to read something and think that doesn't make any sense, and they don't want to like take it apart, so something that's not coherent. And so we, as a non-native speaker, I tried to spend a lot of time, writing emails, especially the ones that are the long emails and where the stakes are higher. Like if I don't do it right, I might have to like waste a week or I don't know, months even. It takes time for someone like me and others like me. So yeah, I mean, because of this, it's often true that like people who start some certain discussions and I think they spend, I don't know, a month or weeks to write that first email, and then just, it appears that they have disappeared after that, like once the other people come along and reply to their emails. And it's not because, that they want to engage, but it's that it takes time to kind of put thoughts together. So what could be done? Like, yeah, patience is one thing that, I mean, as I said, we need more time. So if you find that becoming impatient, so I would say that depending on who you are like talking to, like it might help if you give us or me time. Using clear language is also good. Like it's easy to kind of use, or not easy, but it's fun when the emails have like jargon and like idioms, or in emails it makes for like interesting reading for those who understand the nuance and like the context and references, but it's not always true for everyone. And unfortunately, I found in my time that I haven't found a lot of like sarcastic tones in the discussions, which is great. If we add that, then it becomes even more complex, right? Clarifications, like when I write something and it's not clear because of it being written in like unclear language, maybe you could ask for you could ask me to clarify myself and request explanation instead of just dismissing altogether. And yeah, it could, I think, be very helpful. And okay, the next point I want to make is a kind of like a psychological one, how, when you are a newcomer or you're starting out with in the Postgres hackers community and you want to do significant things, but you're kind of nervous about doing so because who is going to take you seriously, So I share my personal story, like back 10 years ago when I kind of jumped into a thread on table partitioning and said that I've done some research on past threads and I can take this on. And I thought that I would get silence, but fortunately, like Robert Alvaro, they encouraged me to, continue what I said I would do. And because of that, I think I'm standing here. If I would have not gotten the chance, I would not have continued to work on Postgres, I think, in retrospect. So I think if we give this kind of chance to like other newcomers, I think we could have like more like newcomers becoming specialists by continuing to like do the things that they do. And I think like generally like if we get more people become good at certain things, then it would also be good because then we won't have to make certain senior contributors like spend their time on everything. We could have like all these newcomers become experienced in their areas and take off some of their load, and hopefully the senior members could oversee kind of like more like architectural stuff that others are doing, and yeah, I think would be like positive overall for the community. And well, the flip side of that is that when you see that someone who is new has taken up a project, it's possible that people who like to manage their time properly, or they who don't want to work on something that whose chances this see as being low, it's common that newcomers just don't get as much engagement as I possibly did back then, but not everyone is fortunate to get that kind of engagement. And we trust newcomers that they will become, significant contributors, but we also have to kind of make sure that there is the support system in place for that to happen. Okay. And well, this is the last point I want to make, and it's about off-list dynamics. We are all here. It's not hacker's law. So in my experience, like I've benefited a lot from off-list collaboration. I have great mentors, managers who have advised me on things, and there are not just like personal reasons, but there could be like business reasons for sometimes there being like off-list collaboration among people and who didn't show up on the list and propose things. I think not like everyone, like as I said, I got a lot of mentorship because of my journey, but not everyone gets that that level of support. So I'm hoping that, like, I think that off-list collaboration is great, but we have to do it in a way that that is inclusive. So, for example, if we have to kind of make a decision about a patch, and it involves like people kind of collaborating or people kind of having some communication off-list, then we have to make sure that the person who has invested time in that patch knows what's, how the decision is being made, and if they are in the dark about that, they can become demoralized because it seems like their work is not valued, right? And yeah, so we have to, kind of have a habit of making sure that we kind of clarify what we are, how we are coming to the conclusions about someone's work, like by being more transparent about that kind of decision making. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say. And if I were to summarize, I think, like, yeah, we have to realize that people have like a personal and work life, and it's not easy for like everyone to kind of transition between these two personas, and we have to give new people chance so that they can continue to become or they can go on to become like significant contributors and specialists. We will benefit from having more specialists, and yeah, be sure to be fair when we are like collaborating off-list, so that we kind of keep like everyone in the loop, especially the person who think they may be like out of loop. So yeah, and I will hand over to Masahiko for the next part.
Thank you, Amit. I'm Masako Sawada, and I'm a software engineer at AWS, and I'm a Postgres committer. And I'm from Japan. And in my part, I'm going to share some experience that are not only for only myself, but also the experience that I had as a Japanese engineers. So for some experience, there are no like clear solutions, and there might be nothing weekend about it. So you might sounds like I'm just like complaining about that, but yeah, please understand I'm not doing complaining and blaming and anything. So I think it's worthwhile even just just letting people know, people are aware that there is individuals in the community who face some issues. And yeah, so the first point I'd like to share about is difficulties with English. So as a Postgres developer who born and raised in Japan, the most difficult, challenging aspect for me was communicating in English. I think this is like a common struggles for the many Japanese, and not just myself. Generally speaking, the Japanese, not good at communicating in English actually, and yeah, so there's the many couple of reasons, I guess. So, for example, the Japan education system, or linguistic differences between Japanese and English, or even just Japanese should spend more time on studying English. I'm not sure. But it is a fact that communicating in non-familiar English takes a lot of time, and especially when explaining or understanding the technically complex things, or we could sometimes understand English slang well, and actually the reverse is also true. I mean, English written by non-native speaker is somewhat difficult for the native speaker to read. It also take time too. But I remember my personal experience that I had a discussion in English with the Postgres hacker at a Postgres conference before long, and the guy I was discussing with was really, really patient, and he had to explain what he's saying to me using various methods, and also he made a lot of effort to understand what I wanted to say. So that experience was really, really valuable to me, and I thought that it's very wonderful. There is such a person in the community. So let's move on to the next one. So discussion in Postgres hackers. I think the Postgres discussion in the Postgres hackers sometimes could be a high context discussion. I mean, there is like implicit understanding or among the peoples, and also discussion sometimes depend on the trust on the people communicating. So it's sometimes hard to understand the people who do not know that. So in that case, they could end up misinterpreting the discussion and leading an inappropriate response. And in the discussion, sometimes we need to provide some the negative feedback or even reject the proposed idea. And I think this is one of the most difficult situations in the discussion. So I heard that the direct communication is much more preferred in America, the US, or Europe culture. But on the other hand, in Japan, actually the Japanese tend to prefer the indirect communication, especially when providing a negative feedback or even rejecting the idea. So yes, I think small change make the change the impression your email gives to others. So I'm also trying to keep in mind when discussing in the Postgres hackers. So the last point I want to share is the differences in the time zone. And the Postgres hackers mailing list is very active. That we have 140 email per day to send to the Postgres hackers, which is really, really active. And I analyzed these emails, and I found that the most active posting hours are around 10 a.m. UTC and 4 p.m. UTC, and which correspond to the evening and the nighttime in Japan. So it is in fact that many discussion happens while the evening and the night in Japan, nighttime in Japan, and by the time I woke up and I check the email in the morning, the most of the discussion have concluded. So it makes this chance to engage in the discussion. So I'm sometimes trying to shift my working hours to align more closely to the America or Europe time zone, and while even living in Japan. And this was sometimes required, for example, when we discussing very important things or quick responses were required. But yeah, it didn't work for me, at least, because yeah, I could, although I could engage in a discussion real time, but my brain didn't work well because it was midnight, even midnight. So my patch quality was really, really poor. So I gave up that. So yeah, about the time zone, I think there is no clear solution, and maybe there is nothing we can do about that. But yeah, this is somewhat interesting because the Postgres hackers mailing list, the many hackers working on that are from the different countries, different time zone. So yeah, this is my experience. So that's all from my part. So I'd like to hand it over to Marin.
So I'm Melanie. I'm a Postgres contributor and recently committer. And I just wanted to start by thanking Robert because he suggested that we do this talk. And typically the work of trying to make communities more inclusive falls on underrepresented people. And he said, I think this would be cool to do. I'll organize it and do all the work. Would you be willing to spend some time talking about this? And I was like, yeah, do the work, Robert, right? Like, you know, so anyway. So I want to try to give you some actionable things that you could do. And the you here is, I mean, we're talking about hacking, so it's mostly people that are, I'm going to talk about the mailing list a lot, but so it's kind of targeted towards that. But the Postgres community is so much more than just hacking, but I'm kind of specifically speaking to that. So first of all, I think listen to women that say that they want to stay technical ICs. Throughout my career, I cannot count how many times people have asked me to become a people manager, you're so good with people, you're so good at talking to people, you should organize conferences, you should, you know, be in product, you should talk to customers, and all of those things are super important, but I didn't want to do any of those things. And like, especially when I was more junior, I wasn't contributing as much technically as other people. So the only way that I could get promoted and add value was if I did the things that I was good at, like talking to people and caring about people and thinking about their feelings. And like, that stuff sounds like a stereotype, but it happened to me all the time. Every performance review, every feedback from my teammates was, she made cookies for us on Valentine's Day. So I learned to never make cookies, never do anything nice for people, and be as unpleasant as possible so people would stop asking me to do that. Oh, yeah. And I think my point is not that everyone should be unpleasant. It's that, you know, like when someone is good at something, like, and you tell them, okay, you should keep doing it, they get better at it. People don't get better at the things that they don't do. So we're actually taking opportunities away from men and, you know, other people by not allowing them to step into roles where they're communicating and liaising with other teams and taking on social responsibilities. Those resilient teams have all of the technical leaders doing things like liaising with other teams and thinking about other people's feelings. And do we really want all ICs who can, you know, mentor someone else to become managers? No, because then all ICs would suck and they would be like solo hackers sitting in their bedroom and not talking to anyone. So like, we want people who care about other people's growth to be engineers too. And and the last one is like, but I'm not telling you don't ask me as a technical woman to do non-technical things. I'm not saying that. I'm saying like, if you ask me to help organize something, 4 out of the 5 things you ask me to do should be like, hey, I thought of this idea for a patch, or, you know, do you want to review this patch? Or, hey, do you want to collaborate on this technical project? And after those 4 things, and you want me to bake cookies for a team event, like, I'll think about doing that, you know? So, and I think that goes to my next point, which is about investing at developers at every level. So a couple years ago, my first or second PGCon, Thomas Vandra and Thomas Monroe were talking about some thing about HashJoin spilling all these files in an unbounded way, and I'd heard about it and had a little bit of context, and I'd read some of the mailing list thread, and I walked up to them and basically was like, what are you guys talking about? And they were deep in a pretty technical discussion about it, where they were trying to come up with solutions. And like, part of the reason that we come to this conference every year is so that we can do exciting technical work for the next year. So a lot of times people are like, I don't really want to talk to people that don't know anything, because that'll get in the way of me coming up with my features for the next year. And like, okay, but there are very few women in Postgres hacking. So if you write off talking to inexperienced people, you're basically writing off growing women contributors at all. So just like putting that out there. So anyway, back to that story. They took the time to explain from basic principles what they were even talking about. And then they were like talking about different solutions, and they had some super crazy thing that would be a huge architectural change to HashJoin. And they're like, yeah, if we could do anything, we would do this. And neither of us have any time, but you know, that's too bad. And I was like, okay, let me try to do that stupidly. And 8 months later of free time and weekends and whatever, I was like, okay, I have a patch. But that eventually led to me working full time on upstream Postgres. So like, you know, how much extra time did it take them to do that? I don't know, but it seems like maybe it paid off, right? Like, so if we do that at conferences, we take that extra time to talk to someone you don't know or to explain something. Like, sometimes that person doesn't end up being a contributor, and then maybe you were just nice, like, and that's also okay, right? So like that, and I think similar to that is that a lot of people first of all, I'm not trying to be super down on the community. Like, I'm here because so many people have spent so much time helping me. So like, thank you, first of all. But a lot of times people say, well, like we talk about educational workshops, like some of the stuff we did here, people say, oh, I hosted a intro to hacking and it was a ton of work. People came and then none of them kept contributing. And that's the #1 feedback I hear is like, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't produce contributors. And what I would argue is that there's 2 benefits to doing that if you never produced any new contributors from those workshops, there's 2 things that it does. One is that it teaches you how to talk to people and think through how to explain things, which is actually what we do all day on the mailing list. And so sometimes when people respond to my email on the mailing list, I'm like, you explained that terribly. I have no idea what you're saying. And so we're going to go back and forth and both waste our time trying to understand what each other is talking about. And maybe some experience teaching and mentoring would actually make you better at interacting with people you already are interacting with. And the second is that it promotes the idea that we actually want new people. So even if those people don't end up being Postgres hackers, like just going out there and doing it, like saying, hey, do you want to learn how to do this? People are like, oh, they do want new people. They don't want to just hang out with the same people they hang out with at every conference. And even if it only does that, I think it's worth some of our time. How much time do I have? Okay, so this is the mailing list part. So in preparation for this talk, I interviewed several women in the community that don't do Postgres hacking about why they don't. And it was more than I have time for here to discuss, but like one of the themes that I wanted to talk to was about the mailing list. And so a lot of times what I hear from hackers about why things on the hackers mailing list, like why we have to be harsh. I hear 2 major themes, and one is that we want to avoid ambiguity about what's acceptable. So, you know, it's kind of worse to get strung along and never hear if your idea can actually go in, right? So we want to give people a definitive answer, like that's not going to happen. And also, you know, so they don't keep working on it if it's not going to go anywhere. And I think like that's valid. Also, we don't want it to be ambiguous whether or not it's acceptable to write code of that quality or do that kind of thing, or if that solution is right. The other thing is like, I think probably more compelling is that if you answer an email and you say, I don't know if that's a good idea, and you know that thread is going nowhere, but then it keeps dragging out. Each day you add a new thread to the list of threads that you're supposed to be replying to so you're not rude to that person. And then eventually there's no time to do any work because all you're doing is triaging all the threads where you're responding to all the bad ideas. And so like it just is impossible from a bandwidth perspective to actually not just be harsh. Those are the 2 main things that I hear. And I think like, yeah, we want to spend time doing work that's valuable. Yes. But I think there's a few things that you can do, tweaks, I guess, that I think could help. And we could still achieve those outcomes, but maybe change some of the tone. And the first thing is to be specific. This will break everything isn't the most, I mean, Robert maintains that it's sometimes okay to say that and that it is helpful to say that. But I think like if someone is going to have to, if the entire, there's a difference between the idea being a bad idea that shouldn't happen, the solution being a bad idea, or a part of the implementation being a bad idea. And all of those, like the distinction between those, especially for someone that's learning and doesn't necessarily know where to look for the resources and all of that, like getting them started on the right path. Like you should just stop working on this entirely and do something else with your time, or you need to figure out a different solution. Like being specific about it is helpful. Speaking from your own perspective is just more of like an empathy thing. If you're like, this is a terrible idea versus I think this is a terrible idea, it's your opinion. And I think that, and also you can be like, I am afraid this will cause me maintenance work in the future that will then interrupt, my vacation, or if this code goes in, it will cause me pain. And I think like that's valid. Like some, contributors a lot of times will, code and leave, like that, they may not be the ones picking up the check for the work. So like, it's okay to share from yourself. Like, I'm scared that this is going to ruin my life. And so like, that's okay. And I'm a little short on time, but I really wanted to speak to the reply to the person and not the content, because you can write different emails to experienced and inexperienced contributors. I think most people here know that. But one thing that I've noticed, so my first emails to hackers, like I remember it would take me 2 days to write one email. And it's not the technical content. It's like, I don't even know what was happening, but you spend the whole day and you're like, why is this email not done? And then over time, it gets faster, and I never could really understand why that was. And then I realized that you start thinking in the way that you talk on the mailing list, like thinking about technical things, like please let me not think about other things in my life in that style, but it changes the way that your brain like sort of thinks about things. So it's way faster to write. You can type up an email right away when you read something and say, hey, and get back to that person, and the format and the way that it is will be something that they immediately understand. Like we've developed basically like a dialect of English that we speak in. So if you read an email and it seems under-researched, or you're like, this is a bad email, and that's your first instinct. Like, first of all, take a step back and think, like, take a second look. And there's a chance that that person did spend a lot of time researching it, and some of the content is there, but you just didn't notice it the first time because the tone or the dialect was different than the dialect that you're used to. And then there's also a good chance that it's not a good email, and the content is, they didn't do performance tests, or they didn't think about this, or they didn't describe the idea, or all of the things that we tell people in the 47 long item checklist that they need to do. Maybe they didn't do those things. And that but if they have an excuse and it's not like someone who's been around and they're just being lazy and disrespecting your time, I think there's a way to respond to it differently. And you can highlight the positive things that they did. So like this one part of this was actually, that's on the right track. Like that's something. And I think that teaches people how to start, doing the things they were already doing more. And to that end, one last story. Sorry, I know we're running low on time. Are we running super low? Okay. Is that if someone has an idea and it's not the most complete version or perfect version of the idea. So I remember there was a thread about file fallocate and like it wasn't handling interrupted system calls correctly or something like that. And I spent a bunch of time because people are always telling you need to respond to more emails, be more active on Hackers. That's the only way you can move forward in your career. And so I was like, okay, I don't know anything about this. Let me look it up and respond. And then I did that. And then someone came after I had responded and said basically what I said, but way better. And the whole thread just diverted around me, and like people only responded to that person. And it was like I didn't even exist. And I think that, of course, we want to be productive and do the best work we can. But like, there's a yes-anding that we can do that's not too much work. Like, you could respond to that one email and say, oh yeah, like Melanie said, that thing, blah, 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 right? And like, it doesn't mean that you have to lower the standard for our work or that you have to like change anything about your day, to be honest, to do it. And so, yeah, anyway, I think there's some things we can do, and that's all I'm gonna say. Sorry.
I want to share just a couple of thoughts. One thing I've noticed is that many people have families. You wouldn't know that from the way that we do conferences. People sometimes bring family members to conferences, which I think is fantastic, but it's not necessarily a friendly environment. If you bring a kid, you're going to have to be 100% responsible for that kid. And you might have a kid and also be a PostgreSQL hacker. That could be true, okay? When we have social events, they tend to revolve around alcohol consumption. Maybe you're Muslim. Maybe you just don't drink much, right? Maybe that environment, for one reason or another, some characteristic that you have, makes that not feel like a great way to spend your evening. I think it's hard to come up with something better, but I think it's worth thinking about. I've also kind of thought about the experience of attending a conference for the first time and how people react to that. I've seen a few people receive a remarkable and probably deeply unsettling amount of attention the first time that they attended the PostgreSQL conference. And I think a lot of people probably receive almost no attention the first time they attend a PostgreSQL conference. So I would say if you're tempted to introduce yourself to the same person that 100 of your best friends are introducing themselves to, maybe look around and see if there's a different person that you don't know that you could say hello to, and spread that around a little bit. We expect a lot from people who want to hack on PostgreSQL. If you as a committer, all of us, many of you, break the build farm, you had better be available to fix it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even if it's Christmas. Like, don't even think about fixing it on Monday. Okay? Don't commit on Friday unless you're prepared to spend Friday evening and, if necessary, Saturday and Sunday cleaning up whatever you just did. And if you're not a committer and you're working with a committer to get your patch committed, you had better do whatever you need to do to produce new versions in a timely fashion, or you're probably going to miss the ship date for that release. So if you had a social life or a family life or like any kind of mental health that you still have left that you'd like to maintain, that is going to have to come second to your community obligations. That's, to me, how it feels like we operate. And I can't imagine that there aren't people who are like, yeah, this Postgres thing is pretty cool, but I'm not doing that. And to be honest, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'm about done doing this because I don't want it to be like that. And I think there have to be better ways that we can handle these issues than what we're doing. There has to be a way that we can take some of the urgency out of this stuff so that it's not a 5-alarm fire when the build farm is broken for 2 hours on a Friday afternoon. I think showing people respect is really important, and I think it's also really hard. You know, it's easy to make snap judgments because we're all in a hurry based on somebody's name or their accent or how well they write, anything other than the quality of their ideas. So we have to resist that. We also need to stay positive. One of the reasons why I fail to do this is because I get tilted. And why do I get tilted? Well, it has a good deal to do with this, right? So I would also ask, you know, try to be nice to other people. I know I really try to do this. I know that I'm often unsuccessful, but please forgive me if I'm not, because I am trying very hard to be nice to people, and sometimes it just doesn't work, and I'm sorry. But I would also encourage all of you, when you do get tired and worn out, maybe just take a minute, take an hour, walk around the block, go buy yourself some sushi or whatever you like to do. For me, buy some sushi, definitely the way to go. Because, I often believe that the way I'm responding to my 8th email of the day is exactly the same as the way I responded to the first email of the day. It's not, okay? It just isn't, right? And so probably that's also true for some of you. And probably if you're ever not nice to somebody on the mailing list, that might be part of the reason why it happens. Thank you all so much for coming to this presentation. I think we have just a very small number of minutes for questions. If you do have a question, say to whom you would like to direct the question. Everyone is not an option because we don't have that time. So please address it to somebody specific. And if you are doing a lightning talk, please, as this is happening, very quietly make your way toward the front of the room so that we can get that started without delay.
Hi. I'm not from the Postgres community. I'm from other open source communities. I just happen to live here.
You are now.
I am now, yeah. So, but a question I have based on the things that were being talked about, has the Postgres Foundation or whatever nonprofit is behind Postgres ever considered, for example, hiring a community manager or a release manager or somebody to do kind of thankless work like triaging the emails ahead of time so that they can hand you something that has already been looked at and has the anger taken out of it, or for example, like being the friendly face who signs up to meet with all the new people at a conference like this who don't know what's going on and say, hey, we got a workshop. I'm just curious because it seems like a lot of the problems have kind of a common thread. And if there were somebody kind of taking care of that, and ideally they're paid to take care of that so we don't add to the burnout problem, that feels like that would be something that could have like a transformative effect on some of the problems you were saying anyway. I'm sorry, I don't know to whom to address the comment.
I'll just comment very briefly. We did discuss something kind of like this on Tuesday, but it didn't involve the being nice part. It mostly involved the being organized part. So maybe we should think harder about exactly what that kind of role might look like. Ideally, being nice would not be the job of just one person in the community, but we might want to like reframe our thinking about that role a bit.
My question is for Robert, and there's a certain impression in the community that if you want to work on something important, it's going to take several years to get that into the community, and that's if certain people are looking at it. So, is there a way to address that?
So the question is there a way to sort of accelerate the timeframes for getting things through the community? I think it depends on a whole lot of things that we don't have time to talk about right at this moment. It is true that a lot of really cool things that people want to do are super hard. And I wrote a blog post about this not that long ago that basically talked about the relationship between how hard the work is and how much stress we're all under. So I do kind of think it would be good if we could find ways to accelerate that process, but I think it's also very difficult because some of what we have to do is just like all get on the same page about the fact that it is going to be hard and therefore it is going to take time, and also therefore we are going to be nice to each other while we're trying to work through all of that. Thanks, Austin.
My question's for Melanie. You used the initialism IC, and I don't know what that means.
Oh, sorry, individual contributor, so okay. Not directly responsible for anyone else in terms of what you're being paid to be responsible for.
Okay, thank you.
This is a bit of a comment in response to a point that Masahiko made, not necessarily targeted towards you, but to one of your points. One of the problems I have is understanding people who have a different accent than me. And one of the recommendations I've often heard about slides is not putting all your text on the slide and reading your slides. But I actually found it very helpful to have most of your points on the slide because it helped me understand what I was hearing. So I'm beginning to think I don't agree with that recommendation anymore. Like it actually made your talk much more comprehensible to me than it would have been without that. I mean, you speak English very well, but like I said, it made it easier for me. And I think it would help a lot if someone with an even more distinct accent was speaking.
Thank you. Thank you for the advice.
Yeah, I had a question for Masahiko Sawada as well. You mentioned how you would expect a more indirect form of communication in Japan. And I've wondered how that applies to code reviews. So like if I'm doing a code review and I'm saying, well, if that system call gets interrupted, then we'll write the wrong data to the disk or something like that. If you were in an all Japanese company, how would something like that be said in a code review?
I don't have any experience the code review in the Japanese company, but yeah, I think in Japan, so for example, I wrote a code and that seems to be not best solution. And one might say, hey, this code is terrible. For example, we need to come up with something else. And other person might say, yeah, I'm not sure this is the best way to go, and we probably find other options as well. And I think as a Japanese, the latter option, latter sentence sounds very softer, and I think it's more preferable for Japanese people, I guess.
Thank you.
One quick comment that I wanted to make is that we had a bunch of discussion on the email when we were organizing for this talk, and we could not agree on what the polite way to tell somebody no was. And like we all had different ideas, right? So we all agreed that there are wrong ways to do it, but some people's wrong ways sounded like other people's right ways, which I think illustrates the very great difficulty of trying to include everybody, because probably no matter how you phrase it, there's going to be somebody who might be the person that you're writing to whom it isn't going to sound right. And I don't know what to do about that yet, but I think we should think harder about it.
Okay. I have a question for Amit Langote. You mentioned that you were encouraged by Robert to work on the partition table feature. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how did you get Robert to encourage you? Like, how do you... Because I would like to get encouraged by somebody, and I'm not sure how to do that.
That's a really good question, and that's something to do with off-list dynamics. A part of it has to do with off-list dynamics, and I think it was that Robert was interested in the problem, and he found that I'm willing to spend time on it, and I thought maybe he decided that that's best use of his time. I don't know, like maybe I'll also allow Robert to say a word on that, like if he recalls anything on why he decided to jump on that thread and encourage me.
Okay. So I was just going to say, Robert, a year ago, he and I started meeting and him giving me some advice. And the way that happened was that I emailed him and said, hey, if I put half an hour on your calendar once a month and send you an agenda with specific things 3 days in advance and a link to an email thread and patches, like, will you accept that email invite? And I also called you Mr. Haas in the email. Because I was like, I don't know if we're on first name terms or what because we hadn't spoken much in person. So, I mean, I'm kind of like, he did not require me to do that in order to meet with him. I'm not saying he did that. I'm just saying, like, I tried to do everything I could to try to make it as easy as possible to say yes. I'm not saying that's what he requires, so I'll let him.
Yeah, I mean, the question is kind of sad for me because it implies that it's really hard to get me to like anything. And like, I'm not joking. Like, I don't go around all day trying to find ways of beating people up. And if you want to email me privately and tell me what I'm doing that's making me feel like I'm trying to beat you up, then like, yeah, do that, because it's not like I'm trying to be that guy, you know? So I think they've already said what they said. I found Melanie's email quite funny because she could have asked it much more normal way, and I would have been like, sure, you know, like it wasn't a problem for me, right? And Amit is also right that I was interested in a topic, but I think we need to conclude because we need to do lightning talks at lightning speed, kind of lightning now. So thanks everyone. That's yours.